I would like to introduce you to this edited talk on diet and diabetes that was given by Dr. Gemma Newman, originally recorded live at London VegFest in October 2018.
My name is Dr. Gemma Newman. I'm a GP. I'm a senior partner at an NHS surgery. I'm going to be focusing on diabetes and how it's actually possible to slow down the progression, to halt and even to reverse type 2 diabetes through lifestyle changes. This is so crucially important is because it's a really common problem and it's growing. For this talk, I'm going to cover three aspects. First of all, I'm going to talk about what is diabetes, how does it happen? Secondly, I'm going to talk about some of the diets and food patterns that can harm us when we have diabetes. Then I'm going to bring it all together and talk to you about how a whole food plant-based approach to nutrition is beneficial if you have diabetes. Diabetes, it's a really common problem and it's growing. We've got 3.7 million people nearly living with diabetes in the UK now, and there's about 1 million extra people just walking around with diabetes and they don't even know it. And then we've got 12.3 million people at risk of diabetes with so-called pre-diabetes. The reason that this is so crucially important is because when you have diabetes, you have an 80% chance of dying of a heart attack or a stroke before your time. Not only that, but you're at risk of many complications. Reduced sight, potential blindness, impotence, peripheral vascular disease, having to have limbs amputated, gastrointestinal disturbances. And this picture represents peripheral neuropathy, which can either lead to numbness or in some cases severe intractable pain, which is very difficult to treat once you get it. It's a really nasty disease. I have seen some incredible, life-changing results for people using plant-based nutrition, but it wasn't always this way. Didn't really think much about food and nutrition. This is a picture of me a few years back. Well, they're actually both me, you could probably tell. The one on the left, I was obese and I was a size 18. I enjoyed what I enjoyed. I was quite resistant to change. This was a problem for me because I do have a strong family history of heart disease. So I decided to do something about it and I lost a lot of weight. I exercised every day. I had a generally low carbohydrate approach to my weight loss and I managed to go from a size 18 to a size 8. I was very pleased about that. I was feeling good, but the downside was I still had a raised cholesterol and a raised lipid profile. So I knew that despite my best efforts, I was not going to be able to achieve what I was hoping to achieve through my lifestyle changes. As I've got relatives that have died suddenly from heart attacks. These are slim people, they weren't obese, they didn't have other risk factors. And for a while I was just despondent about that and just thought, oh well, never mind, that's my genetic fate. That's just my life. I began to do some research, and the more I researched, I realised that there was another way. The research of Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Cobble Esselstyn, Dr. Garth Davis, Dr. Michael Greger, a few of many doctors who have been able to uncover a lot of the research over the last 80 years or more to show that a plant-based approach to nutrition has profound effects on what we can achieve through the power of our plate. I decided to take my own advice on this and I adopted a plant-based diet. Within around a month of doing that, I was able to show completely normal, healthy lipid profiles. And this is many years later, 2 kids later, half the amount of exercise later. It's possible to do this through these dietary changes. What are the causes? Now, there are many causes of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, genetic, and there's usually an environmental trigger. In type 2 diabetes, there is also a genetic link, and there are also lifestyle triggers. Now, there are so many things associated with diabetes, poor sleep patterns, stress, shift pattern working, sedentary lifestyles, lack of exercise. Even certain use of mouthwash can actually, believe it or not, predispose you to type 2 diabetes for other reasons. So what about type 1 diabetes? It's an autoimmune disorder. Your own body starts to attack to your pancreatic beta cells, the ones that make insulin. There was a genetic link to that, But around 90% of people with a genetic predisposition don't actually end up with type 1 diabetes. There has to be an environmental trigger. And we don't always know what that trigger is. Viral triggers are supposed to be one, but one that's come up in quite a few studies to show an association between cow's milk exposure and the development of type 1 diabetes in children. And the reason for that is thought to be because the serum bovine albumin and the beta-casein proteins look very similar in terms of their structure to your pancreatic beta cells. So if you are going to develop a reaction to them, then that would partly go some way of explaining the link there. But what about type 2 diabetes? When you have a sugary meal or a meal with carbohydrates in it, you will have glucose in your bloodstream, which is a normal thing. It's the primary fuel source of the body. The glucose needs to get inside the cell to provide it with energy. But what happens is, when you have type 2 diabetes, it can't happen. It gets stuck in the bloodstream. Having a high blood sugar is the outcome of type 2 diabetes, but it is not the underlying cause. One of the main underlying causes that we're going to talk about is saturated fats, trans fats, and excess oils in the body. So not just fat that we eat, but the fat that we carry, because adipocytes or fat cells have a very similar effect. Glucose needs an invitation to get inside the cell. It can't just go there by itself. It needs to bind to insulin to get inside the cell. There is that the insulin key on this lock and key analogy. So the glucose binds to the insulin, and then the insulin has to bind to an insulin receptor on the cell surface membrane. So far so good, except when the insulin receptor is clogged up. So what happens is that the insulin key on this lock and key analogy can no longer work. So it doesn't matter how much you try and force the key in the lock. Unfortunately, the glucose stays in the bloodstream along with the insulin. And the reason that this clogging up happens is because of dietary fat and fat that spills into the bloodstream from adipose tissue, from fat tissue in our body as well. The pancreas notices and it wants to do something about it. So it does the only thing it can do, and it produces more insulin because there's excess sugar in the bloodstream. We need to get rid of that glucose. It's toxic to your blood vessels and to your nerve endings. It doesn't matter how many new keys you make, because if the insulin receptors are all clogged up, you're just going to end up with more sugar in the bloodstream and more insulin. Having a sweet potato or a bowl of quinoa, your insulin sensitivity will have dropped and your insulin resistance will have risen. And then blood sugars have gone through the roof. You've got all these spare keys and they've got nothing to unlock. That is the basic mechanism by which dietary fats and fats within the bloodstream cause insulin resistance. Fats cause insulin resistance. Studies have now shown that when you measure the amount of free fatty acids in the bloodstream, have someone who is overweight or have someone who is obese, they will be higher than somebody who is a normal weight. About the adipocytes, they spill out the extra free fatty acids into the bloodstream. But if someone has a high-fat, low-carb diet and if they are slim, they will unfortunately still have high circulating fatty acids in the bloodstream. So they will still suffer from insulin resistance to a degree. Insulin resistance, it's a lot to do with trans fats from things like margarines and other processed foods. The only natural source of trans fats is animal products, and it happens as well with saturated fats. And this is the biggest danger of having a diet that's very high in animal products. The high fat causes damage to the mitochondria, inflammation inside the cells, and then further perpetuates insulin resistance. And then it's a vicious cycle that goes on and on and on. Your pancreatic beta cells, you can get saturated fats in the form of palmitate, and you can get unsaturated fats in the form of oleates. Oleate is things like olives and avocados and nuts and seeds. When you look at fats in the lab and you put them in a petri dish with pancreatic beta cells, these are the cells that make insulin, you find that it's the palmitate that causes rapid destruction of the pancreatic beta cells the longer you leave them in the petri dish. So it's not even just about the receptor issue that I was telling you earlier, it's also about the destruction of the pancreatic cells themselves. Dietary fats have a direct influence on your ability to metabolize glucose, which is of course our primary fuel. So there's multiple reasons why this would happen. We talked about fat cells and junk saturated fats. We talked about the fat spill effect, the clogging of the receptors. Also, dietary fats inhibit insulin function in the first place. So that's yet another mechanism on your ability to metabolize glucose. Patients attempt to stem the flow of the disease, to try to control blood sugars, but sometimes we're causing harm as well. Sulfonylureas are a really common medication that we give for people with diabetes. Gliclazide is probably what you might be familiar with if you have a relative with diabetes or if you're diabetic yourself. Gliclazide is useful because it brings your blood sugars down, but it forces the pancreas into excessive insulin production, which, if you're thinking about what I just told you with regard to the lock and key mechanism, you're just making more keys and they're not going to get inside the cell because of the jamming of the lock. It doesn't help the underlying cause, unfortunately. Also, UK-PDS data shows us that when you're on metformin and you're adding in gliclazide, on average it takes about 3 years for half of those patients to need yet another additional medication. This is over and above what you'd expect pancreatic decline, thought to be because of the medications that we are giving. So it's not by any means a quick fix. And of course, when things get really bad for type 2s, then they start on insulin. When a type 2 diabetic starts on insulin, you know that they're not on the route to recovery, because excess insulin, unfortunately, is associated with increased risk of atherosclerotic plaques in many studies. Not only that, but you get more hungry. If you're more hungry, you're going to eat more of the foods that have got you in the mess that you're in, and that's not helpful either. Weight gain, again, is also associated with increased insulin resistance for the reason I said earlier. It's all those fat cells spilling the free fatty acids back out into the bloodstream, making things worse. And there is even, in some studies, an increased risk of cancer with these higher insulin levels. Now, what about type 1 diabetics? You know, I mentioned them before. They obviously will need insulin. They don't make any themselves. But what the type 1 diabetics will really need to do is optimize their insulin. The less this they can have, the better, because IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, this in excess is also associated with increased cancer risk and reduced longevity with the higher doses of insulin. With the ACCORD study, this was a study which aimed to prove that tight blood sugar control through the use of medication was beneficial to diabetics. Unfortunately, the study had to be closed down 18 months early because of excess deaths in the cohort of people that had the best blood sugar control. The reason for that is because they had the highest amount of medications that they were being given to try to control their blood sugars. So this is a serious issue. You know, we can actually potentially cause harm with our medications rather than benefit the underlying cause. I'm going to talk about the high-fat, low-carb diet. It's because it's really popular. People lose weight. They lose weight quite fast. And so with weight loss, you've got less of a risk of diabetic complications. And you've also got lower circulating insulin because you don't have as much glucose in your diet. So everything's looking better in terms of the numbers. But there was a study published in the British Journal of Nutrition back in 2012, which showed us that in actual fact, a high-fat, low-carb diet is much more likely to stiffen your arteries. It reduces the suppleness of your arteries all over the body, especially in the peripheral parts of the body, the legs. And this is not a good idea if you want to reduce your risk of heart disease and stroke. Also, the only study to directly compare a healthy high-fat, low-carb diet to a healthy high-carbohydrate diet showed that there was a definite lack of blood supply to the coronary arteries. These are the arteries that crown the heart, the ones that supply the heart with the blood that it needs to keep pumping. This is a serious issue. You also increase your long-term risk of heart disease and stroke by other mechanisms. For most people on a ketogenic diet, the majority of what you're eating will be animal-based products. That means that you have the vast majority of what you're eating from fat. There'll be some green vegetables, there'll be some non-starchy vegetables, and in terms of fruits, it's really just berries. And that's around 30 grams of carbohydrates are allowed per day, less than 10% of the diet. So what's good? Good about a ketogenic diet. You lose weight quickly, you have a flatline blood glucose, flatline insulin levels. Some people seem to thrive on. There are some people talking about how they've managed to improve their autism and then you'll see mild cognitive decline. But when we know that this diet is so bad for insulin resistance, why would some people do so well on it in the short term? And the short term is the key here. The reason is because they've used a ketogenic diet to increase their mitochondrial flexibility. Now, the mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. And so this is why in some people with a ketogenic diet you'll feel better. But unfortunately, there are many other potential side effects which I'll come on to. Complications with a ketogenic diet. I have talked at length online about why I think the ketogenic diet is harmful long term. There's a couple of plant-based news videos, 9 nutrition studies every keto dieter needs to read, and why I quit low carb and went vegan. Got the short-term complications of basically feeling quite grumpy and miserable and having bad breath and getting constipated and having brain fog. And then you've got the long-term complications, which are much more serious, even things like cardiac arrhythmias. It's really not something to be taken lightly for that reason. Even people that do well on keto or vegan keto, they find that within 6 months they've increased their risk of other chronic diseases. So please don't live in ketosis. The mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. They are also cell signalers. We really need them in order to create energy inside our bodies. When you have a ketogenic diet, you are activating the PGC1 alpha pathway. Now, what is this PGC1 alpha pathway? It's a way for mitochondria to make more of themselves, so basically to multiply, and it's also a way to clear out old mitochondria, the ones that are not working very well. But what else can activate this PGC1 alpha pathway? Well, is a very strong PGC1 alpha activator. Is a high intensity interval training, HIIT training. Curcumin in the form of turmeric can activate the same pathways. Also quercetin. Quercetin is found in red onions and broccoli and green tea, for example. Resveratrol from red grapes and berries, pistachios and peanuts will also have the same effect. Even cold plunges will have this effect. It will boost your mitochondria quickly. So basically, rather than doing keto, just go on a few spa days a year. That's my recommendation. Other diets that stimulate the PGC1 alpha pathway. The most effective way that I've read about is the fasting mimicking diet, which is essentially a very low calorie vegan diet for around 800 calories a day for about 5 days in a row. And you can do that maybe once every few months to boost your mitochondrial flexibility, to activate this PGC1 alpha pathway. Another way of doing intermittent fasting is time-restricted feeding. That means aiming to keep your food intake within around a 10 to 12 hour window each day if you can. So if you're a person that has breakfast at 7 a.m, for example, then aiming not to eat past 7 p.m. would be a basic tenet of the time-restricted feeding principle. But apparently the less time that you feed in, so if you can manage to do it in 8 hours or 10 hours, that has even more of a benefit. I think this is a really good way of restricting calories day to day. We're going to talk about a whole food plant-based diet and how it can improve diabetes for you. And why does it work so well? You're essentially optimizing all of the healthy constructs of a human diet. You've got the greens, the beans, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the seeds. All of that stuff has very unique properties to ensure that you're getting every micronutrient without having excess macronutrients. Here is the whole food plant-based diet pyramid, which I really like. I think that's a beautiful picture because it shows you in real terms what a whole food plant-based diet can be composed of and gives you a very clear idea of the colour, the beauty of nature, the power of plants to heal you and the power of your plate. The calorie density of different foods. Our caloric restriction improves outcomes for people with diabetes. In fact, there was another recent study showing that diabetics get better when they're starved. Of course, if they have these micronutrient shakes, but they can't sustain it. They don't want to live like that. The The beauty of a whole food plant-based diet is that you can maintain it, you can enjoy it, keep your weight down without being starved. If you compare the calorie density of different foods, you can see that oil doesn't give you very much fullness in your belly. Neither does cheese, neither does meat. Potatoes, rice and beans fill you up nicely. But look at those veggies. You'd have to eat an awful lot of those to fill up me with the same amount of calories. The broad study, many studies talk about how exercise improves outcomes or how caloric restriction improves outcomes. The broad study that came out of New Zealand, it was done by GPs using diet alone. These menopausal ladies who were all overweight were told to eat a whole food plant-based diet, and they managed to bring their weight down and keep their weight down without increasing their exercise and without restricting their caloric intake. So it's a very unique study in that regard. Check it out if you're interested. The Adventist health studies in this large study of well over 60,000 people, they're all Seventh-day Adventists. They do differ a little bit in what they eat. They have vegans, they have vegetarians, they have pescatarians, they have flexitarians, and they have non-vegetarians. On the whole, they look after themselves. They don't drink, they don't take drugs, they exercise, they keep active, they've got good social links, they've got a spiritual belief pattern, which are all associated with longevity. The non-vegetarian Adventists were healthy generally because their prevalence of type 2 diabetes was 7.6%. So the American prevalence of type 2 diabetes is around 11%. The whole food plant-based eaters have been shown to be the only group of North Americans that managed to maintain a healthy weight, but also had a dramatically reduced risk of type 2 diabetes by a massive 78%. That's microbiome research, because it's showing us the power not only of plants, not only of what we eat, but also in our relationship to our microbiome in our bodies, the mini universe contained within us. We are supposed to have billions of microbes inside us and on our skin that protect us, that produce vitamins for us, that allow us to create neurotransmitters, that even create serotonin for us. The majority of serotonin, that feel-good neurotransmitter, is made by bacteria in the gut as long as we have beneficial gut bacteria. When we have a whole food plant-based diet, we are optimizing these beneficial gut bacteria. It's amazing. We're taking in foods that feed them directly. Prebiotics, we know probiotics means these gut bugs. Prebiotics are what feed these gut bugs. And what are prebiotics? Dietary fiber. Don't get any dietary fiber get from animal products. Zero. So if you're having a whole food plant-based diet, pretty much everything you're eating will hopefully, unless it's complete junk food, be fantastic healthy fiber for your gut microbes. What happens is it gets into the large intestine, they break it down into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, and these short-chain fatty acids are amazing. They draw cholesterol from our bloodstream that's not needed. They attach to our white blood cells, healing up the gut lining. They attach to receptors in our guts to tell us that we're full. And I said earlier about the serotonin and the vitamins that they make. They even make vitamin B12 for us, actually. So some of the B12 that vegans need will actually be made by their microbes in their gut, but we can't rely on that. Not only does diabetes affect many of us, but insulin resistance affects many more. Think about polycystic ovaries. Think about gestational diabetes. You know, all these things have insulin resistance and inflammation at their core. So you can improve these things in yourselves. Even if you're not diabetic, you will do great good for your body. But what can be achieved? As I mentioned before, type 1 diabetics can expect a potentially normal life expectancy, which is incredible. They can potentially reduce their insulin needs by 2/3 and reduce their heart attack risk dramatically. Well, if you're medical professionals, you can make a difference in 10 minutes. This is really your chance to be their advocate. This is your chance to show them the power of their diet, the power of their plate. They might actually begin to believe you, and they might actually change what they do day to day. You will have a tremendously rewarding work life. I cannot overstate this enough. It will bring you happiness. You have to be careful. If you casually recommend, just go whole food plant-based, look it up online, you might find yourself in a situation with a patient where they've got severe hypoglycemia because they don't realise how fast their insulin sensitivity shoots up. They may still be taking the same amount of glycoside. They may still even be injecting insulin. You have to be so careful because they will respond so quickly. So you have to tell them you will need to considerably drop your medication requirements. So do warn them how effective and how incredible this can be. On a whole food plant-based diet, there is plenty of protein. People might ask you, where do I get my protein from? All the foods that you will eat contain protein, even fruits and vegetables, especially nuts and seeds, beans. Take a look at this list. There are so many particularly protein-rich sources. What about calcium? Make sure you have a nice variety of whole food plant-based foods to get that calcium in their diet. Calcium is very well absorbed if you're taking it from plants. Take a look at this list. If you want particularly rich sources, I would like to talk about Joel Fuhrman's G-bombs. This doesn't cover every kind of healthy food group, but it's just a nice introduction for people if they want to remember what kind of food they should have more of each day. G-bombs. B is beans, and that also includes chickpeas and lentils. O includes onions. Onions are fantastic, both raw and cooked. They give you different micronutrients when you cook them compared to when you don't. They contain alliinases that are really beneficial. They're antioxidants, really good super health food. M for mushrooms. You have to cook mushrooms to get the best benefit, but they are a unique superfood. They're the only fungus people tend to eat, and they are very healthy, so that's why they're in the G-bombs. B for berries. Berries of all sorts, really healthy, lots of antioxidants and phytonutrients, so I would definitely recommend that on the list. And S for seeds. I particularly am a big fan of flax and chia seeds because they contain short-chain omega-3 fatty acids. What can I eat? You can eat all sorts of delicious whole food plant-based options. Say, look, these are some great breakfast ideas. These are power pancakes. Porridge mixed up with the seeds. Lunch ideas in the way of whole grains, fresh whole foods and plant foods. Dinner ideas, simple switches, alternatives, or roast dinners, curries, chilies, all of that kind of thing. Snacks, it can be so easy. This particular chocolate mousse I love, and it's all whole food plant-based using avocados. Eating out used to be a big challenge, but not so much anymore. You can get all sorts of delicious whole food plant-based options, but you do have to ask for specific menus, and you just have to be mindful of added oils. Omega-3 fatty acids. These are really important for brain and heart health. You can get short-chain omega-3 fatty acids from flax seeds, chia seeds, walnuts, hemp seeds, and you can make the long chains yourself, so you don't need to worry too much. But I would say if you're diabetic, if you're elderly, if you're pregnant, if you're a child, go directly to the source, take your EPA-DHA algae supplement. Algae is the original plant form of these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. That's where the fish get them from, so you don't have to worry about absorbing it, the heavy metals and the PCBs and the dioxins that are concentrated in the fish muscle and in the fish liver. So that would be my recommendation. I would say, please do take your vitamin B12. B12 is made by microbes in the soil. Many of us don't get enough of it, including meat eaters, especially if they're over the age of 50, and diabetics, because they will usually be taking metformin. Metformin is known to interrupt your ability to absorb B12 from the stomach, and so do proton pump inhibitors like omeprazole or lansoprazole. So if you know anybody on those medications, then they're going to really struggle to absorb their B12, whether they eat meat or whether they don't. I like to recommend a spray, particularly in the methylcobalamin form, because it's more bioavailable and because you can absorb it through your tongue. You don't have to worry about absorbing it through your stomach. Vitamin D3 comes in many vegan sources now, and I'd recommend that because many of us don't get enough sunlight, and it's important to make sure we have enough vitamin D. Sunlight is the optimal way of getting it because it's a hormone you synthesize through your skin. I would say try and get some sunlight for your optimization, but it's pretty hard in the UK, and so that's why I would always say supplement just in case. What about diabetics who want a little bit more help? I would strongly recommend these two books. I've mentioned Joel Fuhrman before. He is a physician in the US who has a dietary philosophy called the Nutritarian diet. And what he says is that essentially you want to get the maximum nutrients from your food whilst eating the minimal macronutrients. So essentially optimizing all of the macronutrients with the minimum calories. And he has a tremendous body of work behind him. Also, Dr. Neil Bernard of the Physicians Committee He's done many studies on diabetic patients now to show the benefits of plant-based nutrition. Both of these books give you very clear guidance on how to do it yourself. The Mastering Diabetes course. It's run by two American type 1 diabetics, Dr. Cyrus Kambata and Robbie Barbaro. Dr. Cyrus Kambata is a PhD in insulin resistance. He knows everything about the cellular biology of diabetes, and he and his partner both strongly endorse a whole food plant-based approach to treat and cure type 2 diabetes, because they're both type 1s, they live this lifestyle as well, which means they have minimal insulin requirements. So hopefully they will also have a normal life expectancy. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook if you want to know more about diabetes and general whole food plant-based nutrition. Try it for yourself. Try a 21-day trial, see how you feel, see if you notice any health improvements, and you have the chance to change your own story. You've got nothing to lose, you've got everything to gain. So that's where I draw this talk to a close. Thank you so much.